I remember when I first heard that Herschel Walker was planning on running for Senate, and I thought the race was over the day he announced. Herschel Walker has all of the characteristics and all of the makings of the type of candidate who should be able to run successfully in Georgia. And he almost, and still may very well, win a Senate seat. It looks like that Georgia is going to go to a runoff. However, what the Democratic Party has been able to very effectively do is basically take his past and use it against him, and take a candidate who is trying to run on a family values, Christian evangelical platform and explain how this individual is personally none of the things that he claims that he wants America to be judged by in the future. And on some level, it's unfortunate because it means that an athlete who is a hero to many people my age has kind of been destroyed, or at least tarnished. But I guess that's part of the consequences of running for public office. In most American elections, in order to win, you simply have to have more votes than the next person. But in some states, or in some situations, that's not enough. You have to have at least 50% of the voters to support you. If you have a race and no one achieves that 50% mark for whatever reason, then you have to have a runoff. Georgia is one of those states. So in the state of Georgia, in order to win a Senate seat, you have to have an election where a candidate wins at least 50% of the voters who've participated in the race. As it turns out, in both of the Senate races in 2020 and again here in 2022, the person who had the most votes didn't hit the 50% threshold, which means the top two candidates have to do it all over again. In 2020, they had to do it 2 months later. In 2022, fortunately, they have to do it in 30 days. And so the next election will be in early December. And it probably won't be until then that we know who actually controls the United States Senate, just like it was in 2020, whenever they had their runoff as well. There's nothing unusual or abnormal or even new about a person trying to trade publicity for political power. And in fact, I was recently talking about the 2000 election where Al Gore beat Bill Bradley. Bill Bradley had started his career as a basketball player and used his fame as a basketball player. John Glenn was an astronaut and used his fame. John McCain was a war hero and used his fame as a way of leveraging into politics. So the idea that an individual candidate would enter politics or would be recruited for politics on the basis of their personality or their fame prior to political career, Ronald Reagan was an actor. That's not particularly abnormal. What was very different this time, however, was that Donald Trump seems to have chosen as a strategy, I want to try to take control of the Republican Party by recruiting a specific type of candidate. A candidate like me, a candidate who doesn't necessarily have fixed political positions, a candidate who I might be able to persuade or control, a candidate who has come to politics through a similar path that I have, and then to put candidates like that who rose to fame via social media in some cases, put candidates like that on the ballot as a way of creating a brand. And I think that this election has revealed that that approach is probably broken. Because while some of these people came to fame through one avenue, once you start digging into their background or their past or asking them the hard questions, asking them to defend themselves in the tough positions, they just weren't ready for that. And while Herschel Walker, again, is somebody I think should be admired, he wasn't prepared to talk about complex issues. It just wasn't a skill that he had been forced to develop. And as a result, he finds himself at a disadvantage and a little bit taken advantage of, to be quite honest, by the Republican Party. In a state that has runoffs like Georgia, the Libertarian Party is just going to get just over 2 percentage points. And the result is going to be that the state of Georgia is going to have to spend several $1 million to rerun an election where the outcome is almost certainly going to be the exact same. The Democratic candidate's probably going to win in the runoff. And so while we like having third political parties, if you mix that with a runoff situation, it adds cost to democracy. And for people who don't like paying for government, they start to question whether or not it has value. In practice, third-party candidates have the effect of bringing new ideas into an election and forcing the two opposing sides to figure out, how do I wrestle with this, for fear of losing support to my side, to the other side. And in narrow elections, that could change either the outcome of the race, or, as we're seeing in Georgia right now, it could force a runoff that maybe otherwise wouldn't have had to happen. And so that kind of energy, it tends to help elections. In theory, what this often ultimately means, though, is that it makes elections a little bit harder to predict, and it often ends up with having election results where the person who wins doesn't actually represent the issues or the interests of the voters, because the voters have been distracted by this third-party candidate and voted for someone who maybe was their first preference, and the result is that their least favorite option ends up winning. My bet is that the two major candidates spent a combined total of $10 to $15 million in a normal election cycle, a little bit more in this election cycle because the races were so closely contested. And I expect there's going to be another $10 to $15 million dropped in the next 30 days on advertisements in Georgia, because one race is going to determine the outcome of Biden's presidency. And for a state like Georgia that has been effectively locked in a perpetual Senate campaign, Warnock ran in 2020 for his seat. He's running again right now. They've been bombarded with the worst part of American political culture for the last 2 years, and they have to do it for another month, and then they're going to have to do it again in the next race in 2024. And so certainly there's a bit of an exhaustion with democracy in Georgia, no doubt.